Consistency isn't about discipline, it's about desire. We think we need to force ourselves, but in truth, consistency is born from alignment. What do you long for deeply enough that showing up becomes non-negotiable? The struggle isn't between you and consistency. It's between you and distraction, between your vision and your excuses. When you learn to bridge that gap, consistency stops feeling like punishment and becomes an act of devotion. So ask yourself, do you want to live in the loop of starting over or in the freedom that comes from never quitting? The illusion of forcing. Imagine this. You wake up in the morning and tell yourself, today I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to stick to the plan. And then you spend the rest of the day fighting with yourself, forcing, pushing, dragging your body and mind into action as if consistency is a punishment you have to endure. This is the way most of us approach consistency. We treat it like a battle of willpower, like a chore that demands sheer grit. But let me tell you something, forcing yourself is an illusion. Real consistency doesn't live in brute strength. It lives in alignment. Think about the times in your life when you didn't have to force yourself. Maybe it was falling in love, starting a passion project, learning something that lit up your imagination. Did you need to twist your own arm to show up? Did you have to negotiate with yourself to keep coming back? No, you showed up effortlessly because the energy wasn't coming from pressure. It was coming from desire. That's the secret we often miss. Consistency feels impossible when we treat it as an external demand instead of an internal calling. Forcing yourself is like trying to swim upstream with all your might. Sure, you can do it for a while. You'll sweat, you'll strain, and maybe you'll even make a little progress. But sooner or later, you burn out and the current pulls you back. Alignment, on the other hand, is like finding the flow of the river. You still have to swim, you still have to move your arms, but now the current is carrying you. Suddenly, consistency feels less like a punishment and more like momentum. The problem isn't that you're lazy or weak. The problem is that you're misaligned. You say you want something, but your daily actions are serving a different master. Distractions, fears, or even the expectations of other people. And that misalignment makes consistency feel heavy, unnatural, exhausting. What you call lack of discipline is often just a lack of clarity. When you know why you're doing something, when you connect it to a deeper desire, consistency stops being about force. It becomes about flow. Let's pause for a moment. Think of one goal you've been struggling to stay consistent with. Maybe it's exercising, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's putting yourself out there in your career. Now ask yourself, is the struggle really about the action itself? Or is it about the story you've told yourself about that action? If you see exercise as punishment, you'll resist it every time. If you see it as a way to strengthen your body so you can live longer, play with your kids, and feel fully alive, you'll start to crave it. Same action, different story. And that shift from punishment to purpose is where consistency begins. Now, this doesn't mean the process is effortless. Of course, you'll still face resistance. Of course, there will be mornings when you don't feel like doing it. But here's the difference when you are aligned. Those moments of resistance don't break you. You no longer rely on sheer force to overcome them. Instead, you return to your why. You remind yourself of the desire beneath the discipline, and that reminder becomes fuel. We need to stop thinking of consistency as a war against ourselves. It's not about beating yourself into submission. It's about creating an environment, internal and external, that makes showing up the natural choice when you align your actions with your deeper values. Consistency doesn't feel like something you have to force. It feels like something you can't imagine living without. So let's not confuse effort with force. Effort is necessary. Growth demands energy, but force is unsustainable. You can force yourself for a season, but alignment will carry you for a lifetime. And if you take nothing else from this, remember, consistency is not born from punishment. It is born from alignment. The desire beneath discipline. When we talk about consistency, people almost always jump to the word discipline. They imagine waking up at 5 a.m., grinding through routines, holding themselves to impossible standards. And yes, discipline plays a role, but discipline on its own is fragile. It cracks under pressure. It collapses when the excitement wears off. That's why so many of us start strong on Monday and abandon our plan by Friday. What's missing is desire. Desire is what fuels discipline. Desire is what makes consistency last. Without it, discipline feels like handcuffs. With it, discipline feels like freedom. Think about someone training for a marathon. If all they focus on is the pain, the early mornings, the sore muscles, it becomes a miserable process. They might push through for a while, but eventually the weight of forcing themselves will crush their motivation. Now, contrast that with someone who connects their training to something deeper. Maybe they're running in memory of a loved one. Maybe they want to prove to themselves they can do the impossible. Maybe they want to feel the thrill of crossing that finish line. The same training, the same miles, but the energy is completely different. The difference is desire. When your actions are rooted in genuine desire, showing up stops being a fight. It becomes something you long for, even when it's hard. This doesn't mean every day feels easy, but it does mean that when the resistance comes, your desire is stronger than the temptation to quit. That's why we need to stop asking ourselves, how can I force myself to stay disciplined? And start asking, what do I want deeply enough that I'll naturally keep showing up? So let me ask you, what do you really want? Not what you think you should want, not what others expect from you. What do you, at your core, desire so much that you're willing to keep walking toward it even when the road gets tough? That question is uncomfortable because it requires honesty. It requires stripping away the noise and the shoulds and facing the truth of what actually lights you up. But once you find it, you unlock a consistency that no motivational video or productivity hack can ever give you. Here's the beauty of desire. It doesn't just carry you through the good days, it anchors you through the bad ones. When you're tired, when you're stressed, when you're tempted to throw in the towel, desire reminds you why you started. And that reminder has a way of reigniting the fire inside you. That's how people stay consistent for years, not weeks. That's how they build habits that become second nature. They don't rely on force. They rely on the pull of something bigger. And here's the part we often forget: desire is not selfish. Desire is the most human thing about us. It's what moves us, what connects us, what gives our lives meaning. When you honor your true desires, you're not just serving yourself, you're showing up more fully for the people around you. You become more present, more alive, more capable of giving. That's why consistency matters. It's not about proving your willpower. It's about honoring your desires so deeply that they shape the way you live. So the next time you feel yourself slipping, don't just grit your teeth and push harder. Stop and ask, what am I truly desiring here? What would make this effort feel less like a burden and more like a devotion? The answer to that question is where your consistency will be born. Because at the end of the day, discipline without desire is exhaustion, but discipline fueled by desire, that's unstoppable. The gap between vision and excuses: every time we set a goal, we imagine a straight line from where we are to where we want to be. We picture progress as this clean upward path, but real life doesn't work that way, does it? Instead, we find ourselves caught between two competing forces: our vision of who we want to become and the countless distractions, fears, and excuses that pull us off course. That's the true struggle of consistency. It's not that we don't want it enough. It's that we're constantly negotiating between our highest self and our most convenient self. Think about it. You set the intention to wake up early and exercise. The night before, you're motivated, you're ready. You tell yourself tomorrow is the day. But when the alarm goes off, you don't just battle with getting out of bed. You battle with the voice in your head that says, stay comfortable. You deserve more rest. You can start tomorrow. That voice is powerful because it's not lying to you. Rest is important. Comfort feels good, but here's the truth. Every time you choose the excuse over the vision, you reinforce that version of yourself, the version that hesitates, delays, postpones. The problem is not that you failed one workout or missed one writing session. The problem is that each excuse widens the gap between who you say you want to be and how you actually show up. Over time, that gap creates frustration, guilt, and even shame. And when that gap grows too wide, it becomes tempting to abandon the vision altogether, telling yourself it was unrealistic in the first place. But the vision wasn't unrealistic. What was unrealistic was expecting yourself to achieve it without facing the negotiations along the way. So what do? The first step is to get honest about the negotiation. Too often, we pretend it's not happening. We either beat ourselves up for being inconsistent or we ignore the tension altogether. But the real power comes when you can pause and say, I see what's happening here. I'm in a tug of war between my vision and my excuses. Just naming it changes the dynamic. It gives you the clarity to choose consciously instead of unconsciously slipping into the easier option. This is where consistency becomes an act of self-respect. Every time you choose the vision, even in small ways, you close the gap. You remind yourself, I am someone who follows through. And every time you close that gap, even just a little, you rebuild trust with yourself. That trust is the foundation of lasting consistency. Now, here's the paradox: your excuses will never fully disappear. That voice that whispers, not today, maybe later, will always be there. But consistency doesn't require silence from that voice. It requires strength in yours. It requires remembering that your vision is not just an idea, it's a contract you made with yourself. The distractions will come, the resistance will come, but so will the opportunity to choose again and again. And this is where it gets exciting, because the more often you choose the vision, the weaker the excuses become. The voice of distraction loses its grip, and the voice of purpose grows louder. Suddenly, what once felt like a fight becomes a habit. What once felt impossible becomes second nature. So let's stop pretending consistency is about perfection. It's not about never slipping. It's about recognizing the negotiation and choosing as often as you can to honor your vision over your excuses, because every choice either widens the gap or narrows it. And the life you want is waiting on the other side of the choices you make today. Consistency lives in the space between your vision and your excuses, and the side you choose is the side that defines you. Reframing consistency as freedom, most of us grow up thinking of consistency as a kind of prison sentence. We imagine it as strict routines, rigid rules, endless repetition. We think it means giving up freedom, spontaneity, or joy. And so we resist it. We rebel against it. We say to ourselves, I don't want to live like that. I want to feel free. But here's the irony: inconsistency is what traps us. It keeps us stuck in cycles of starting and stopping, promising and breaking promises, getting excited and then losing momentum. That's not freedom. That's exhaustion. Think about how much mental energy is wasted when you're inconsistent. You start a new habit. You get a burst of motivation, you do it for a few days, and then you stop. A week later, you feel guilty, so you decide to start again. But by then, you've lost the rhythm. You've lost the trust in yourself. You've lost the momentum. So each time it feels heavier, harder, more discouraging. That cycle doesn't make you feel free. It makes you feel trapped in your own inconsistency. Now let's flip that. Imagine you commit to a habit and you actually follow through. Day after day, week after week. At first, yes, it takes effort. It feels uncomfortable. It feels unfamiliar. But eventually something shifts. It stops feeling like a fight. It becomes automatic. It becomes part of who you are. And when that happens, you don't spend energy debating whether you're going to do it or not. You just do it. That's when consistency stops being a burden and starts being a relief. That's when it becomes freedom. Because true freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you want in the moment. That's just impulsiveness. True freedom comes from no longer being controlled by your impulses. It comes from being able to trust yourself. Trust that when you say you're going to do something, you'll actually do it. That trust liberates you from the constant noise in your head, the endless negotiations, the guilt and shame of breaking your own word. Consistency gives you that trust. And with trust comes freedom. I want you to think of someone who plays an instrument beautifully, or someone who paints, or someone who moves with grace in their sport. Do you think they became free in their art or their performance by doing it once in a while, whenever they felt like it? No. Their freedom of expression was earned through consistency, through practice, through showing up over and over, even when it wasn't convenient, even when they didn't feel like it. That repetition gave them mastery, and mastery gave them freedom. The same is true for us in our daily lives. Consistency might feel restrictive in the beginning, but it is the very thing that unlocks our potential. When you no longer waste energy deciding whether to act, you free up energy to create, to grow, to explore. Consistency clears the mental clutter so you can live with greater focus and greater ease. So the next time you hear that voice saying, I don't want to be tied down, I want to be free, remember this: Inconsistency ties you down far more than consistency ever will. The real weight comes from starting over again and again, from never building enough momentum to actually feel the joy of progress. Consistency is not the enemy of freedom. It is the path to freedom. And the more you practice it, the more you'll realize that freedom is not found in avoiding structure. It's found in trusting yourself enough to build it. Consistency doesn't take away your freedom. Consistency is your freedom. The micro actions that compound. When people think about consistency, they often imagine big dramatic actions. They think it's about massive change, huge leaps, bold transformations. And because of that, they hesitate to start. They tell themselves, I don't have the energy for that. I don't have the time for that. But consistency isn't built on massive effort. It's built on micro actions, tiny steps repeated so often that they reshape the way you see yourself. Consider this: every time you make a small choice aligned with your goal, you're not just completing a task, you're casting a vote for the kind of person you believe you can be. When you choose to take the stairs instead of the elevator, you're voting for the identity of someone who prioritizes their health. When you sit down and write a single page, you're voting for the identity of someone who shows up creatively. When you put your phone down and give your full attention to a loved one, you're voting for the identity of someone who is present and intentional. These choices might seem small, even insignificant in the moment, but they compound. And over time, they transform not only what you do, but who you believe you are. The real power of micro actions is in how they build trust. Each time you keep a small promise to yourself, you strengthen the bond you have with yourself. And let's be honest, many of us have broken that bond far too many times. We've promised we'd start the new habit, stick to the routine, follow through. And then we didn't. Each broken promise chips away at self-trust. And without self-trust, consistency feels impossible. But every small action is a chance to rebuild it. You don't need to overhaul your entire life. You just need to take one step, and then another, and then another. Think of it like planting seeds. One seed doesn't look like much. You put it in the soil, cover it up, and for a while, nothing happens. It's easy to doubt whether it even matters. But if you keep watering it, keep showing up day after day, something shifts beneath the surface. Roots start to grow. Foundations take hold. And eventually that seed breaks through the ground and begins to grow into something you can see, touch, and feel. That's what micro actions do. They build invisible progress until one day it becomes visible transformation. And here's the beautiful part: once those small actions start compounding, momentum kicks in. Momentum is what carries you when motivation fades. Momentum is what makes the next step easier than the last. That's why people who stay consistent don't rely on inspiration. They rely on momentum built from showing up, no matter how small the effort seems. But let's also be clear, these micro actions aren't just about reaching a goal. They're about rewriting your identity. If you tell yourself, I'm not a disciplined person, but then you consistently do small disciplined acts, eventually your brain has no choice but to catch up. You begin to see yourself differently. And once your identity shifts, consistency no longer feels forced. It feels natural, because now you're not trying to act like someone you're not. You're simply acting like the person you already believe yourself to be. So don't underestimate the power of the small. Big change is nothing more than small actions multiplied over time. Every time you choose to show up, you're not just moving closer to a goal. You're proving something essential to yourself. I can be trusted to follow through. And that, more than anything, is what builds lasting consistency. Because in the end, consistency isn't about giant leaps. It's about the quiet power of small steps repeated until they become who you are. Choosing your narrative, every single one of us, is telling a story about who we are. Sometimes we tell it out loud, but most of the time, it's whispered quietly in the back of our minds. That story shapes how we see ourselves, how we show up, and ultimately how consistent we are. And here's the truth. The story you choose to believe will either hold you hostage in cycles of inconsistency, or it will set you free to build a life of momentum and progress. Think about the story of inconsistency. It often sounds like this: I'm just not disciplined. I always quit. I can never stick with anything. That's just who I am. These stories don't sound dramatic when they're playing on repeat in your head, but they carry incredible weight. Because when you tell yourself that narrative often enough, you start to live it out. You create the very inconsistency you're afraid of, not because you're incapable, but because the story convinced you it was inevitable. Now imagine a different story. Imagine one that says, I am someone who shows up, even if imperfectly. I am someone who values progress over perfection. I am someone who keeps moving forward, no matter how small the steps. That story doesn't erase challenges, but it changes the way you meet them. Instead of seeing a missed day as proof you failed, you see it as a temporary setback in a larger journey. Instead of quitting because the story says, see, you always stop, you say, no, this is just a pause, and I know how to begin again. This is why consistency isn't just about what you do. It's about the story you keep choosing to live in. If your story is one of restarts and regrets, you'll keep looping through that cycle. But if your story is one of persistence and resilience, you'll start to live differently. You'll start to embody the consistency you've been searching for. Here's what's powerful. You don't have to wait for some big milestone to change your story. You can begin right now. Every choice you make is an opportunity to write a new line in your narrative. When you choose to get up and take action, even when you don't feel like it, you're rewriting the story from I give up easily to I am someone who keeps promises to myself. That's how stories shift through choices repeated over time until they become your truth. And don't underestimate how contagious your story is. The way you narrate your life affects not only you, but also the people around you. When you live in a story of inconsistency, you model that to others, your kids, your colleagues, your friends. But when you live in a story of consistency, of persistence, of resilience, you inspire them to do the same. Your story has the power to lift others into consistency as much as it lifts you. Of course, writing a new story doesn't mean the old one disappears overnight. That old voice will still whisper, reminding you of every past failure. But the more you live in your new story, the weaker that old voice becomes. You don't have to erase it. You just have to choose not to give it the microphone anymore. So the question becomes, which story are you choosing to tell? One of quitting, excuses, and endless restarts, or one of growth, persistence, and becoming the person you've always wanted to be? The answer is not in what you say, but in what you do next. Because in the end, your story is being written either way. The only question is whether it will be a story of regret or a story of resilience. Outro of this video, consistency is not just about habits, it's about identity. Every day you either cast a vote for the person you want to become or for the excuses that keep you stuck. The truth is, inconsistency feels safe, but it steals your freedom. Consistency may feel hard, but it gives you power. It's the bridge between desire and achievement, between who you are today and who you dream of becoming. You don't need perfection. You need persistence. And the moment you choose to honor your vision over your distractions, consistency stops being a struggle and becomes your greatest strength.